What's up, guys? Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be looking at how to make our inventory menu a little bit more navigable. This way we can actually navigate it using our keyboard controls as opposed to the mouse. This will be useful because we can also use the same method just with different controls to assign a controller to the game and then use that to navigate our items. So as an example, let's grab one of each of our weapons that we have and we'll go through it. Now, just by pressing W and S, I can move up and down. You can see that my character still does move in game. There's a reason for that. I'll explain that in a few minutes. But yeah, you can see I can move between these items and the selected item will pop out. So I know which one I'm on. I can also confirm without using the mouse and spawn that item. Put that item in hand. And then I can close the menu as well. All with my mouse, which also means, like I said, all with a controller. So we don't need the mouse anymore if we don't want to use it. I haven't disabled the mouse functionality because, especially being a developer, when you're working on a game, sometimes you want to use the mouse. Sometimes it's easier for you. Sometimes you want to test something with it, or if things work better one way or another. So I've left it alone. However, I have given it full functionality with the keyboard. And I think this is important because I went to do dual wielding, and I'm like, you know, we kind of need a method to set this up, and maybe we want to select multiple items, not just one. And if we do this with mouse, it's going to be a pain. And I think it was time to finally upgrade our inventory system to be able to work with controls and menus. It's something we definitely have to do anyway, and I think now is the time to do it. So let's hop into it today. Good thing is, most of today's work is just going to be in two blueprints. We're not going to do much jumping around to make this work. So I have inventory window and single inventory item. Now, inventory window is where I have my list of items and where your pictures for your armor will show up in the future. And then single inventory item is like the individual button with the name and the weight I have in this case, but you can make your buttons look however, or you know, you could just have images, whatever works for you, however you set this up. Now, before we get started, you may want to check out the other episodes of the series so you're kind of familiar with what's going on. If you do want to check them out, then feel free to click this link in the top right corner. It's to the third-person tutorial playlist, so it'll show you everything that we've done so far to get to this point. Otherwise, if you just want to see inventory, I'll link you to the first inventory episode so you can at least catch up with how we've done all of this logic. Alright, and anyway, so in our inventory window, we have event construct, and essentially what happens is, once this widget is created, which it's created when we press a certain button in the character. So, for example, and I can actually go to this, in our character BP, base character BP here, we had this input action open close menu, which happens to be assigned to 2 right now. Number 2 on the keyboard. And if the inventory menu reference is not valid, then it creates one, sets the reference in the character, and adds it to the viewport. It also has the player controller as the owning player. So then when we get into the inventory window on construct, it gets the owning player, cast to the character, sets it to be the character reference, and then we grab the inventory items, loop through them, set the item details, and add them to the vertical box here, which stores all of our elements. Now, that's stuff we've already done in the past. We've done that in previous episodes. Not important for now. But the reason I'm bringing this up again is because we were doing that on top of some other stuff to assign focus and different things like this. We don't actually need to do this anymore. We're going to be using it all through the keyboard now and or controller when we get controller support in. So I took out some of the logic after this because it just wasn't necessary anymore. We're now using our own navigation methods, and we're creating our whole system for navigation. So we don't need to have all that old stuff that we had in here as a template for this stuff. So feel free to take out anything you see after this. If you've been following the tutorial exactly, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll see it in there. We had quite a few nodes. We had 4 or 5 other things afterward. We don't need any of that anymore. Once this loop is completed and all the items have their details set and they've been added to the vertical box, So completed. Then we are going to do a few things to set up our custom navigation. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm setting something called number of elements. So I have two integers that I made. We make new variables by clicking plus variable, clicking on the type here on the left and changing them to integers. All right. And number of elements is how many elements we have to be able to navigate through. We also have a current element, which is the current element that we're currently navigating through. So once this is completed, we grab our inventory elements vertical box, which we already had for this add child, but you can make a new one if you want, or just drag off the same one like I did. And I type get all children. All right. And so we get this node. Just for the record, inventory elements vertical box is this thing right here. So as long as you have this checked as is variable, you'll be able to see it. Again, it should already be in your graph if you've been following the series. But if you're just watching this as a standalone video, I just have a vertical box in this widget, made sure that it is a variable. Things are being added to it. And now I'm grabbing it to get all the children. And the array that gets returned, I want to get the length from that. I want to know how many elements are in this inventory box, because that changes how our navigation works. If you saw, I actually allowed the navigation to flip over. So once I have, say, even just 2 elements in here, then when I go between these two, you can see that I don't have to switch directions. It'll start back at the top again. So it rolls over. And because of that, I need to know how many elements are in this vertical box. So I take that length and I set number of elements to it. You can just drag it onto this return value if you want, or drag it in, not get, drag it in and set. All right. So that's setting the number of elements. The current element can pretty much always be 0. It defaults to 0. I mean, it'll change as we're moving, but you don't really have to set it in construct or anything like that. It already has a default value of 0. All right. And now this next part we're going to do, this is going to take up a lot of the space here in this blueprint, and it's all really the same thing, just changing minor functionality each time. So we're going to set up each control for the function that it's going to perform. So for example, I have up, down. I actually included a left, right as well, but you can see that I have no reason for them in this menu, so I'm not listening for them. And then I'm going to trigger some animations as well to make it look a little bit nicer. So first things first, let's go to Edit, Project Settings, Input. And I've closed all my other input actions. I've added all of these input actions. It's okay if they have the same keys as some of your other things, like your axes or your actions. And so you have WS, WS, whatever. It doesn't matter. We're going to specifically listen for these actions now. So in this case, I have menu up, menu down, menu left, menu right, menu confirm, and menu back. These are all buttons that I know I'm going to need with the controller and with the keyboard if I don't want to use my mouse for these things on the menus. There will also probably be others, like, you know, perhaps there's a change color or a show info on some item. So there's probably going to be a lot more as we go on. But for right now, we really only need up, down, confirm, and back. I've just added left and right because we're going to need left and right in menus at some point, most likely. All right. So once you've added these, and the way you add them is you go up to action mappings and hit the little plus. You can type in the name and then select the key with this drop down. Once you've added them, make sure you have the exact name up. You can either keep this up, you can copy the name, whatever is easy for you, and search for listen for input action. Okay. What this does is it listens for when this input action is pressed, release, whatever we choose off of this event type. Okay. So if we keep it as pressed and we put in the exact name for the action name, then when this value, which is this menu up, is set to W. So when W is pressed, we have this event is going to trigger, but it needs to be able to do something when it's pressed. So right now, when this callback is empty, nothing will happen. But you can drag off this callback, type add custom event, and then call it whatever you want. Now, I don't want to add extra custom events here, so I'll show you what I've done. But listen for input action, callback, and I've renamed that event that I brought off of it and called it move selection up. I've done the same for menu down. So listen for input action, action name menu down, pressed, callback move selection down. So I've made two separate events. We'll go over this functionality that we have in here shortly. Then we have listen for input action menu confirm, and I have another event, confirm selection. Listen for input action menu back, and I have another event, return from menu. And then I call two other functions afterward, which again you'll need to see what they are to make sense of them. But these 4 listen for input actions you can set up now, and you can also set up the events that come from them. Just name them whatever you want, just so that you know what event it's tied to. All right. Now we can go over some of these functions and what they actually do. So we have move selection and trigger button slide animation. These are the 2 functions that I've added, and they're both going to be important. Move selection is going to actually move our current element value here. That way we know where we're actually at on the menu. And then trigger button slide animation is going to slide the buttons out and then back in when we leave them. So if we go into move selection, so make a new function, click plus function here, you can call it move selection. And then when you click on it, or when you click on it in here, you have input parameters, or just inputs. You can press the plus to add a new parameter, and I've added one called direction that's an integer. So direction in this case, and for those that may have seen other menu videos that I've done, basically just refers to, like, if it's up, then maybe I make it positive. If it's down, it's negative. I think it's reversed in this case because of the way they get added to the vertical box, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a way to tell what direction we are moving so we know how to change the current element. So just give the direction an integer value or an integer type, and that'll be your input parameter. And then we're going to go over this entire function. I know it looks a little confusing, but I think it should make sense once we get through it here. All right. So first things first, let's just go over what's happening here. So essentially what we're doing here is we need to change our current element based on this direction, so based on what value was pressed, but we don't want to go over how many elements we have. If we do, we want to restart at the top, and we don't want to go under the bottom element, or the first element. So if we do, we have to restart at the bottom. So we have some logic to implement all this right here in this little function. So what I'm doing is I have the direction as an integer, and when we press up, the direction is -1, because again, these items get added to this vertical box. The first one gets added at the top, second one below it, third one below it. So the top element is up at the top of the vertical box. So the first element that gets picked up and in the inventory is at the top. So when we're going up, we're going down 1 index. When we're going down, we're going up 1 index. So you can see the direction I've passed in when I've called move selection up is -1. Direction I passed in when moving down is 1, +1. All right, and so now what we do is we take the direction, and I do a plus, so int plus int, and I pass in the current element. All right, so I'm taking the current element, I'm adding the direction to it, and I'm making sure that this is less than, integer less than, the number of elements. This is the maximum number of elements, and we have to make sure that whatever this change is, the current element is less than the number of elements. If it's not less than the number of elements, we want to restart it at the top. Remember, if it's greater than or equal to the number of elements in the list, then we want to reset it. We want to make sure that we go back to the top of the list, and that way we roll over. Otherwise, you're going to have the user have to press like multiple times to get to the next element, and it's just not what we want. Okay, so this is the first section here. That's this whole first bit right here, these nodes. All right, I know there's a lot of reroute nodes, so you can get rid of those, but that's really all this is as a start. All right, now the false. So the false, if it's not less than number of elements, is we just set current element back to 0. Again, we're just rolling this over, and we're restarting this like it's a circle. We've reached the end, so we restart at the start. So if it's greater than or equal to the number of elements we already have, set it back to 0. Go back to the top. Then if it's true that it is less than the number of elements, then we have to make sure that it's greater than or equal to 0. And the reason for this is, so if it's less than the number of elements, if current element plus the direction is less than the maximum number of elements. Remember, we're adding a -1 when we go up. Well, we also don't want it to go below 0, because if it goes below 0, then we want it to roll over to the bottom. We want to be at the bottom of the list now. So we check and make sure if it's greater than or equal to 0. So if it is greater than or equal to 0, all we do is take the addition between current element and direction. You can see here's the reroute node. It goes up here, goes right here. All right. So we're just setting the current element to be this addition. But we have to specifically check this value to make sure that this addition is greater than or equal to 0 to know that it's a good value to set. Otherwise, if it's false and if it's not greater than or equal to 0, then we set current element to be number of elements minus 1 instead. So we set it to be the final index, the bottom index. You guys probably know this by now, but the reason we do number of elements minus 1 is because number of elements is set to the length of the array, which the length returns the number of elements in an array. However, when we are accessing the array, we have indices. So for example, if I had 3 values in an array, 0, 1, and 2, the length would return 3, but there is no third index. There's index 0, index 1, and index 2. So number of elements minus 1 returns the last value in the array, and we set that to be the current element. All right. And now that we have move selection, you can see at the end here, at the end of begin play or construct here, that I have these 2 other nodes. I have move selection and I have direction 0. It's not really necessary. I do this intentionally just because if there's anything in move selection that I want to trigger whenever I open the menu, it can do it, but we add a direction of 0 so it doesn't actually change where our location is. All right. Next, we'll be going to trigger button slide animation. All right, so for the trigger button slide animation, this is a function I made that triggers an animation that is going to be done on the single inventory item widget. So if we go into our single inventory item widget, then this is what it looked like in the past. The only thing I've done now is I've added a new canvas and I've added an animation that can be applied to this canvas. And so the way this works is if you add a new canvas to this, and the way I do this is I just type canvas panel, and then I drag it into where I want. I put it under the first canvas, as you can see. Specifically, I'm talking about the button canvas is the one I added. So I put it under the first canvas, which is the overall widget canvas. And then I drag all 3 of these things. You can shift and click to select all of them and drag them under button canvas. Once you do that, it will arrange them underneath of this, as you can see. And once you do this, we can apply an animation on this so that everything moves in uniform. One quick note, when we make this change and when you change the hierarchy and the parenting of widgets, sometimes things won't be able to be seen. So in my case, the item name and the weight were both behind the button because of this change. Because that's the case, you can change the Z order to 10 for the name and the weight to ensure that they're automatically on top of the button. Technically, you could just make it 1 because the item button Z order is 0. It just has to be whatever is the highest number will be rendered last. So it doesn't really matter what you make it. I make it 10 so that I can have some extra things in between. I know I'm always going to want the text and the weight to show up. So making it a number like 10 ensures that nothing will override it unless we make it higher than that. All right. And with that out of the way, we can now make our animation. I have gone over making animations and widgets in a few episodes, but I don't believe we've done any in the third-person tutorial series. So it's pretty simple, actually, to do a simple animation like the pop-out we're doing today. The way I normally do it is I go to Window and hit Timeline. This is the first thing you need. It'll pop up this tab right here, or wherever you have tabs that it finds necessary. Like if you didn't have compiler results here, it might actually put it in one of these other windows, but you should see it pop up, and it's called timeline. Now, when you go to add an animation, this animations thing should be here if you have your timeline open, but for some reason, if it doesn't, you can also open the animations tab here. And once you do that, you'll have both of these tabs open. You can do plus animation, and it will make a new one. So I've already made mine, but I'll go through making this temporary one with you so that you can see how it's made from scratch. So you can rename it. I'm going to call this temp animation. You can see from my original, I called it slide out button. And now the way this works is we have tracks, and these tracks are specific objects. So we have our canvas panel right here. And this is just going to be called canvas panel if you haven't renamed it. I renamed it to button canvas because if you don't rename the canvas panel, the animation, the track actually can't find it. Technically, there are ways around it, but it's much easier if you just rename this. So I called mine button canvas. It does not have to be a variable. So my canvas panel, I made it the same size as I made my button. As you can see, if I click on my item button, it is 800 by 80, and my canvas is also 800 by 80. This is important because if we change the size of this canvas panel, it will change the look of your inventory. So make sure it's the same size as whatever it was before or however you want to display it now. Once you've renamed this to button canvas and made sure the size is correct, we're ready to make the animation. So you can plus track, and you should find button canvas because I'm clicked on it. Like you can find kind of whatever you clicked on. But specifically, I want to name it so we know which one it is, and because we can always look at all named widgets to find it. All right. So once we're in our animation, we can hit add track, and we can leave the button canvas as the track or select the canvas panel slot. Either way here, doesn't really matter. Now, I'm not going to need the canvas panel slot for this animation. I'm going to just use the transform. So you see that I deleted the canvas panel slot. Alternatively, just click the top one. Up to you. But that's how you can get the most out of this animation system. So for the button canvas, if you hit plus track down here on the right side, then you'll be able to change all these things about it to determine what it looks like, how it acts during this animation. For us just to slide it out, all I've done is add a transform. You can click on this to open it up to everything, and you can change different things about it, like the translation, rotation, scale. So all I've done is change the translation and move it on the X. However, we have to know, this is our timeline, so we have to know how fast we want this to happen. This is in seconds, so in 0.25 seconds, I want this next thing to happen, let's say. So the way I do this is you start at 0, and that's your initial spot. This is where it is on the widget. If we go 0.25 seconds ahead, we can then click on this to add a new key at the current time. And you can see it added it for all of these, but you can take out ones you don't need. For example, I don't need any of these. I just want the X translation. So I have 2 points of time. I have 0 seconds and 0.25 seconds. Once these times have passed, anything that I do on this side, on the 0.25, will then be reflected on this object. So if I click on the keyframe or just have that, or have the little timeline tag here at the 0.25 second mark, I can then change something about this, like move it all the way out here if I want. And then when I am to go back and forth between this is how the animation looks. So in 0.25 seconds, it'll perform this action. And now that you're familiar with how this works, I'm going to delete the temp animation, go to the slide up button, and show you my actual values. I do have 0.25 seconds, and I've slid out 20 on the X. And that's this little pop-out effect that you see. Okay, so that's all I've done. It's a nice little animation. Compile and save that. And now the slide out button will be a variable that we're able to grab. So if we go back to our inventory window, I've made this trigger button slide animation function, so you can make a new function and go into it. This one does not have any sort of input parameter. And we're basically just going to play this animation. However, we do have to play it in a way where it can also go back and make sure that only the one we're currently selecting is the one that's playing. So let's go through this logic a little bit. Should make sense. So in the function, we have our vertical box again. We get all the children and we loop through them. So the only children of this inventory elements VB, the vertical box, are the single inventory items. So we're basically grabbing all of them, looping through, and casting them to the single inventory item class. Because the children can be more than one class, we do need to cast and make sure that the type we are grabbing is our single inventory item. And then we have to determine if it's already the one that has been slid out or not, because we only want one slid out at a time. So if we go back into single inventory item and go into the graph this time, we've had all these variables in the past, except for this one called is slid out. And you can maybe come up with a better name than I could, but basically we need a Boolean to determine if this is the active one on the widget. So just make a new variable, make sure the type is Boolean, and call it whatever you want. Set it to false by default because we don't want any of them to be in the on position or the slid out position by default. All right. Now, once you do that, if you drag off of your casted single inventory item, you'll be able to grab this value. It is slid out. Just get it, and then drag that into a branch. I have a bunch of reroute nodes here, so I will try and show you what's going on. But basically, we're determining if this is already slid out, then we want to perform the animation to slide it backward. Now, we never made an animation to slide it backward. However, we can play the slide out animation in reverse to basically slide back in. It's the same animation, just the opposite direction, basically putting it back to its default state. So you can see I have all these reroute nodes, but really what's going on here is I'm pulling off of the single inventory item, and I'm grabbing our slide out button. This right here is an animation. You see, it's called a widget animation object reference. Slide out button is referring to this right here, slide out button. Okay. You can also see it in the graph under variables animations, slide out button, and you can see it's public, and we can grab it. Okay, so it's hidden by default, but that's how you can find it. So I've grabbed that here, slide out button, and if I drag off of this, I can type play animation, and it will go in as the in animation. We do need the target that we want to play this on because multiple widgets can play this. So you can see that my reroute node of my cast also goes into that. So single inventory item cast goes into this, slide out button goes into the in animation, and then the other thing you need to change is the play mode from forward to reverse. And so now if I delete this one, because we already had this one up above, you can see that's what I've done here. And at this point, when it's playing in reverse, we're going from out to back in, meaning that we are no longer using that as our current selection. Because of that, we're no longer slid out either. So once the animation is complete, or really once the animation has stopped triggering the play, then we also, you can see all these reroute nodes. This is just single inventory item set is slid out right here. And you can see I'm setting it back to false. Now notice that the white line does not come off of this. That's the end of this. This is basically, the initial part of this is resetting all of the buttons that are already out if they do not need to be out anymore. Once this loop is completed and we've gone through all the children in the vertical box, then you can see this is the completed logic. We do a very similar thing. In fact, we do pretty much exactly the same thing, but the opposite. We get all the children, and we actually get just the current element. Okay, we're not going to loop through them like we did before. We were getting all children and bring into a for each loop. This time we're getting all children, literally typing get a copy, and then dragging in the current element, like that, to get the element that we are currently on. At that point, we want to pop this one out. So we cast it to our single inventory item. We grab our slide out button animation. We play animation going forward with this item as the target. Then afterward, we set it to be slid out. That way we can reset it next time when we move off of that item. All right, and this is the trigger button slide animation. Okay, and so I call that every time I move. So if we're moving up, I call it. If we're moving down, I call it. And I also call it at the end of begin play after, or at the end of construct after move selection, just because I do want to pop out the first one. Even if we haven't moved yet, I want to pop out the first index because that's where we are currently at. Now, at that point, we're actually good with everything there. We only have to take care of these other two input actions, so menu confirm and menu back. Menu confirm is when we confirm the selection. Before we were clicking on it to confirm, we can do the exact same logic we were doing on the click, except we want to do it when we're pressing the confirm key or button on our controller and we've highlighted, a specific element. So the first thing we need to do is we have all this logic in single inventory item. Again, all covered in other episodes. We don't have to edit any of it. Okay. But this was only on pressed on the item button. What we can do now is add a custom event. I've called it confirm item, and I've just started it the exact same spot where we press the button if we were to click on it. And so all the logic on confirm item happens on pressed item button. And that's really all we want. We want the same logic that was happening before when we were clicking on it. But we do have to know what item to do this on, because the item itself, the button itself, has the data about the object reference and what object we have to spawn and all these other things. So if we drag off of our callback, go to our confirm selection, all we do is this. We go our inventory elements VB, get all children, get at the current element, just like we were doing for the animation. We cast it to the correct type, single inventory item, and then we call our new event that we just made, confirm item. Lastly, if we want to go back, really what we want to do is close the inventory menu. I'm going to just kind of piggyback off of what we did before in our base character BP. So before in base character BP, we had this logic where we were opening, closing menu based on, if we press this input action, we can open it and we can close it. Well, we can't really close it using just a key if we don't trigger it from the same spot, because we don't want to ever trigger like the close from two spots. It just gets messy. It's really a lot cleaner to trigger it using one method or the other. So what I've opted to do is make a new custom event yet again and call it close inventory menu. This is in our base character BP, or basically the owning player that spawns the menu. And this logic was already here yet again. But what I do now is I just bring it directly into this remove from parent. Really, you could definitely check if you could bring it to start here and it would work, but this is being called from the inventory menu, so it's actually impossible for it not to be valid and for it to call this. So you might as well just set it to be, just have it go directly to the remove from parent and the inventory menu reference. Cool. All right. And with all of that done, you are good to go. You don't have to change anything else, but just make sure that everything is working and make sure you have your numbers set up correctly. So if I add this to my inventory, it's going to be pulled out by default, and yes, I can technically reset it. If you wanted to fix this, you could check to see if there's more than one item before playing out the pop-out animation, but it's not really necessary. All right. And then I can go and add all the weapons, and I'll even add the items, the equipment, to our inventory. All right. And I have all these things, and I can go through all of them. And now I told you I would let you know why you could still walk while you're in the menu. So right now, we were playing it kind of like a Dark Souls game where, and I just use that as an example, there's tons of games that do this, where you pause the game and the world around you is still moving. The world doesn't really stop. So that's how this is kind of set up to work. Now, you probably shouldn't still have control over your character during this, but we're not doing anything to stop that either. So we will have an episode as we continue with this inventory logic where we pop up a screen and stop the world around us and all these other things. But right now we're not doing any of that, so I just haven't bothered to change the widget, the focus, the game mode, any of that, because there's a lot we have to do with that. We could just set it now and not do anything with it, but it's going to change how we use our controls and how tick works when we're in that and that sort of thing. So I think that should all be held for another episode. But anyway, so you can see I can go through all of them. They pop out correctly. And then I can press X to confirm. And you can see I'm changing my weapons. I have the dagger now. Helmet is on. Chest plate is on. Leggings are on. And same thing. I can't really take these off in this case just because of how it's set up currently. But I can unattach my sword if I want and all these other things. So everything's working as intended, and I can press Z, which is my back out button, to exit the menu. And at this point, I can continue my life as normal. So while it might be a little bit clunky because of you're allowed to use other mechanics, and because we don't actually remove things from our inventory when we unequip them, we just despawn them and put them on the ground, then we're pretty much good. We're in good shape. We can navigate it now using keyboard, and once we add controller support, it'll work without question. And we also went over a little bit of menu animation and widget animation, so we can make our games look a little bit nicer. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. Helps me and the channel more than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys so much for everything. I really appreciate it, and it means the world to me that you're continuing to support me. I love this series, and I love you guys. Thank you so much. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It is completely free, and I'll be happy to assist you. Alright guys, so that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.